This is the Dairy Download brought to you by EverAg Insights and the International Dairy Foods Association, where we offer extra sharp market and policy insights on dairy. I'm your host, Phil Plord.
And I'm your co-host, Kathleen Wolfley.
This week's episode is all about dairy farming and the rural economic outlook. Our guest joined us at IDFA's Dairy Forum a couple weeks back for a couple of engaging conversations. We'll get to that in a minute. But first, Kathleen, where are we now?
All right, Phil, CME spot prices as of Friday, February 13th, 2026, not quite Valentine's Day. CME block cheddar closed at $1.39, down 9 cents on the week. Barrels finished at $1.44, unchanged. Butter closed at $1.71, also unchanged. And the spot non-fat dry milk market closed at $1.60, 4 cents lower on the week.
All right, Kathleen, what's the most important thing right now?
Phil, I still think that the non-fat market tightness is still the most important thing right here in middle of February. We found out kind of around that Dairy Forum timeframe that there just didn't seem to be quite as much supply available. And the more you dig into it, the detail certainly seems to confirm as much. Yeah, we've got more milk being produced in the US, but that milk seems to be finding its way into other avenues, whether it's into more cheese making or into things like UF production or skim condensed milk. Ultimately, it just doesn't seem like the milk is hitting the dryers. What's funny is you think about a place like the Northeast where I sit, there's new capacity that's rolling along, and there's commentary around maybe the balancing plant's not running like we've seen in years past, which brings up memories of years and years ago, thinking about balancing plants being balancing plants. Are we getting back to balancing plants being balancing plants again here in the US, Phil? So that to me is the most important thing.
You can run short of powder in a balancing plant environment. I've been thinking about a famous Warren Buffett quote after watching this non-fat market the past couple of weeks. And that quote is, when the tide rolls out, you see who's naked on the beach, right? And
Yeah.
as scary a thought as that might be, but as we start to see this non-fat shortness take form, there's some people that got caught short. So this is a good old fashioned short squeeze rally. But when do we get the jolt of supply to put out the fire? We'll see. It could happen quickly, maybe not. We'll see what happens. But I think it's a really important thing because, well, it's been a while since we've seen a class 4 rally of any substance, and there's lots of questions about how the U.S. price fits against the world market price. Can we pull the world market price higher? Are we going to end up coming down because we can't get product into the world market? Which is it. Look, right? High prices encourage supply, discourage demand. If we discourage U.S. export demand, problem over. If we encourage a little bit more milk finding ways to the dryers, that's price doing its job. So, yeah, it's kind of fun to see, and I think it's still important and does remind us that balancing plants are balancing plants.
Well, and I think too that this rally in powder, and it seems to be spilling over to butter to some extent as well, has opened up opportunities from a dairy producer perspective to manage some additional risk on the class 4 front. So as we consider what does milk production look like in 2026 and beyond, I do wonder if this recent upswing does potentially kick the can down the road on potential milk contraction.
Yeah, we were already in the it's going to take a while camp, and we're certainly sending, at least at worst, mixed messages at the moment, right?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. All right, Phil, what's your most important thing?
Well, sort of the inverse of, when we talk about high prices encouraging supply and discouraging demand, low prices tend to encourage demand. And so the most important thing to me right now is spring holiday domestic demand for butter and cheese. Ash Wednesday is on this coming Wednesday, February 18th. Easter is on April 5th. Passover, April 1 through 9. Big butter holidays, typically. Also pretty big cheese holidays. Get the Final Four in there too, somewhere along the way. March Madness basketball. And so with wholesale cheese and butter prices at low levels, even with butter's recent rally, we're still way lower than we were a year ago. Are we going to see retailers promote butter and cheese aggressively? Will we see the mythical 2 for $4 butter deal somewhere during Lent? I suspect, we could see some aggression there. And does it move the needle on demand in a way that's consequential for prices? So how things are shaping up for Lent and the run up to Passover, those would be, to me, one of the most important things right now.
I did hear rumblings, Phil, that there was a pound of butter for 99 cents at a Wisconsin local gas station. Have you seen that?
I need to get gas today. We'll see. I didn't see it yesterday, but I was not paying attention. They usually advertise it right over the gas pump. So,
I think it was a limit one, but still, we haven't
hey,
seen that in a while.
if I go get gas, I'll go grab a pound.
All right, Phil, what is your stat of the week?
Plus 5.4%. That was European milk production growth in December by our estimates. Another big honking month of milk production in Europe. And I've been waiting for people I think that the models and the experts, it is very easy to kind of say, well, we'll see this cool off pretty quickly. And by Q2, we'll be back to something close to flat. And I'm not going to rule that out because the comps get harder, blah, blah, blah. However, if you look at the weekly numbers that we see occasionally, France is still up 5.9% in the latest weekly report, Germany up 6.4, UK up 3.6. So we're still throwing off some pretty big numbers in Europe, and this, as February unfolds. So this thing still seems to have momentum. And if there's gonna be that much milk in Europe, that's gonna prove problematic, I think, for pricing at some point. Well, it already is problematic for cheese pricing, if you will, and could prove to be a party killer and a rally killer in terms of markets going forward.
One thing that I've been thinking about from a EU perspective is part of the reason why we've seen this big slug of milk to finish up the year is the atypical lactation curve, right? So is it possible too that we catch the market off guard if we've pushed the lactation cycle back a few months in 2025? Do we push back the seasonal trough of milk as well? So when you'd expect to have lots of milk, it's not around?
So we kind of peak early and trough
Yeah.
early.
Yeah.
I think that's possible, but I still think that it's hard to get your head around this, or it's hard to get my head around this, is that, we talked about, well, we'll be lucky to squeeze out 1% milk production growth. And, we're at 5% plus. So even if that's true, it'll be interesting to see what that means in terms of the numbers. I just have a sense that producers were geared up to make milk, and we still haven't really sent European producers the stop signal on, from a price perspective. I mean, prices have gotten lower and maybe just a touch below the average cost of production, but we haven't slammed on the brakes price wise.
Nope.
So again, these things take time, and Europe is big in milk production.
Yeah. Okay, Phil, my stat of the week is 2.143 billion pounds. That's how much non-fat and skim milk powder the US made in all of 2025. To put that in comparison, that is the fourth consecutive year of declines in non-fat and skim milk production in the US. That's 22% less powder than we made in 2021. And I believe that it's the lowest annual output going back to 2013. So when we talk about milk powder being tight and supply being a little less robust than what we've had in years prior, hey, guess what? We're just not making as much.
Yeah, I mean, some of that erosion has to do with wet solids being favored over the drier, and salt being needs differently. But at some point, if you need powder, you got to be making powder, and we haven't really been doing a lot of that.
Okay, what's your fearless prediction?
We're going to go a little bit offbeat on this one. This week, McDonald's reported Q4 same store sales at plus 6.8% year over year in the United States. Spectacular number, best showing since some point in 2023. I think we might even talked about on this show. Big Grinch promotion drove big traffic. Minecraft promotion at the beginning of the quarter. So LTOs worked great for McDonald's. If you look at the data, if you look at the traffic data, however, not as strong in January and February. So my prediction is this: we will not see McDonald's same store sales be up by as much as half of Q4's in 2026. In other words, nothing over 3.4% in 2026. I just don't think the momentum's there.
Okay, well, I guess we'll see. What did you say the other day? The Christmas left Whoville?
I thought that was pretty funny.
It was pretty funny. I laughed.
The McDonald's surge in traffic ended around the same time the people in Whoville took down their Christmas trees.
Okay, Phil, I'm going to go with a fearless prediction that is pretty fearless. And we'll have an answer here within 2 weeks or so. The new crop butter transition happens on Monday, March 2nd. So we close on February 27th on a Friday, reopen on the 2nd, and any butter eligible for sale in Chicago had to be made December 1st, 2025 to that end of February timeframe. So historically, we typically see about a 3% pop in prices, butter prices, between the end of February and the beginning of March. I think in 2026, we are going to see a greater than 10-cent increase in spot prices between Friday the 27th and March 2nd.
All right. I mean, I mean, we're doing a lot of the work ahead of time,
We are.
the little pre new crop convergence, but 10 cents on new crop, what'll be new crop Monday.
Yep.
I'm not going to take the other side of that one, Catherine. I'm not going to take the other side of
You're
that
not
one.
going to take the other side of that one?
Nope.
I think that going back in history, I want to say I went back 15, 20 years, and the biggest was maybe 16 and a half. Maybe that was in 2021. So it's not unprecedented to see plus 10 cents or more. Phil, we had some really great interviews when we were in Palm Desert, California for IDFA's Dairy Forum. Let's get to our first live interview. We're at Dairy Forum 2026 in Palm Desert, California, and we are excited to welcome Blake Alexander to the show. Blake is the fourth generation co-owner of the Alexander Family Farm, specializing in A2 organic milk, regenerative dairy farming, selling products from cream top bottled milk to powdered milk concentrates, and everything in between. Blake is a deeply involved member of the dairy farming community, currently sitting on the California Organic Products Advisory Committee, Del Norte County Resource Conservation District, and the Farm Bureau Board. Blake, thank you for joining this live edition of the Dairy Download.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so you grew up on a small dairy farm in Ferndale, California. You've been deeply involved in agriculture since childhood. Tell us a little bit about your background and how that's shaped your philosophy on farming today.
Yes, I grew up in very small town, Ferndale, California. It was probably 100 dairies, and the average dairy was 50 to 100 cows, maybe 150 on the big side. And so I grew up on one of those farms. It was a rented farm. I've got two sisters, one a year older, one a year younger. And so I was the boy and always outside with dad, feeding calves, working. And I just kind of grew up absolutely loving cows and cattle and dairy cows. It was a small grazing dairy that was, it was my whole world, and I really enjoyed it and got to see a lot of nature and, kind of how cows interact with the environment, and went from there.
So I understand that your nickname is the soil enthusiast. Can you share what sparked your passion for soil health and why it's so central to your approach?
I really learned about, soil and at college level. And, basically that's where I learned that soil, or dirt is the stuff that's under our fingernails, and soil is the stuff that, things grow in. And as I learned in college, it was pretty straightforward. It was all about, large scale agriculture in a sense. And then when I started considering going organic about 30 years ago, I read a book called The Biological Farmer by Gary Zimmer out of Wisconsin. And eventually he became a good friend. And that's when I really woke up to what's really going on in soil in regards to the biology and the interaction between what I would say God intended for us to understand about soil, and that the livestock that we're really farming is under our feet. It's not the cows or critters on top of the ground. It's the stuff underneath. And so once I kind of got that in my head, it really opened up a lot of opportunity.
And like, if we're talking 30 years ago, you're sort of at the very front end of the revolution, if you will, or the organic movement. Was it lonely out there, or how did that unfold?
Well, I live in a very remote part of the world, and so I'm used to lonely, and I have no issues with that. And yeah, we were definitely a kind of somewhat swimming upstream against the normal crowd, and we just quietly did that, and I never ever regretted it.
You made a comment about livestock being under the ground, and I'm picturing like
Yeah.
corrals of worms as
Sure.
livestock. Sorry.
Yeah, it's you even got to think smaller. It's stuff you can't see, bacteria, fungi, microanthropods, protozoa, little single-celled stuff, then the earthworms.
Okay.
Yeah, and so it's and, and and there's literally billions of living beings in a teaspoonful of soil. And so my job as a farmer is to keep those little critters fed and healthy and comfortable, and don't abuse them with chemicals and harsh fertilizers.
Is is that part of what pushed you in the farm to go toward a regenerative agriculture system?
Yeah, I think the concept of swimming upstream, we had launched our brand about 8, 9 years ago, and we were at a big Expo West out in Los Angeles area. Um, and I'd heard there was a couple of groups looking to start a regenerative certified program. And so our daughter was with us that year, and we asked her to participate as a pilot program for these two different groups. And so we did that over a 3-year period, and they were developing the rules and the concepts. We didn't really know what regenerative was. For us, it's just a new word to explain a very old system that our creator gave us. And so we were enthusiastic about being part of that movement and solution. And so that led to us becoming the very first certified regenerative farm in the United States.
So what is a regenerative farm? Define it for us.
Yeah, it's basically regenerating soil as opposed to degenerating soil, if you would think of that. Degenerating soil happens in all kinds of ways, and when you don't pay attention to the biology that's living in the soil, and you expose them to a lot of sun or chemicals, then the soil is vulnerable to wind and water erosion, and so the Great Dust Bowl tried to teach us that back in the 50s, but we didn't learn our lessons, and so I think now there's an awakening that if we want to keep our soil intact, we need living roots in the ground. We need to keep the biology fed, and that happens through photosynthesis on green plants, bringing sunlight in and creating sugars and capturing carbon out of the air and moving that carbon through the plant down into the roots where there's actually exudates or little juices that leak out, feed the biology and create tilth in the soil. So we actually build soil that looks more like a chocolate cake as opposed to sand.
So going to the dairy side of things, talk
Mhm.
about your products and how that part of the business come into being, and how's that unfolded over time.
We have 5 children, and when they were little, about 21 years ago or 22 years ago, we started a small egg business with laying hens to really give our kids a project so that they could really sink or swim taking care of those chickens and selling the eggs either at farmers markets or a couple little stores, and then that just grew and grew and grew. Today, we're selling about 20,000 eggs a day, and that business has continued to grow. We call it Alexander Kids, and the kids now have kids of their own. Um, but that led us to developing, Stephanie and I were developing our organic dairy and A2 milk production. So A2 is the digestible protein, the casein in milk that's more digestible. And when we learned about that back in 2008, we just felt we needed to move in that direction. So we started breeding our cattle and selecting our cows for A2 milk production. And then there was no market for organic A2 milk. And so one day we just decided that, what the heck, we're going to do it. We had that little bit of experience starting a brand with eggs. And we were just kind of crazy enough to start a dairy brand. And so that's how we developed our A2 dairy products that eventually became regenerative.
And what products are you selling today?
Yeah, the primary products we started with was a 6% butterfat milk, whole milk. We had to get special legislation in California to call it whole milk. And so we've been kind of dare to be different. It was, I'd say, our theme. We wanted to be a high fat company. So our cows spend a lot of time on grass, and so the nutritional goodness comes from the grass or is in the fat. And so that 6% butterfat milk, and then a few years later, we came out with 100% grass-fed milk. Today, that is our number one selling SKU. So different versions of that. We also make yogurt out of that 100% grass-fed milk, and also out of the 6%. We also make kefir with the grass-fed milk, 100% grass-fed kefir that has trillions of biology and colony-forming units, and so it's a super probiotic food, and it just happens to be the number one selling kefir in the United States in the natural foods category.
How are you distributing your products?
In the natural foods category, we have two choices, and you have to use both of them if you're going to be in a broad spectrum of stores across the country, and so that's UNFI and KeHE, our big distributors. They both have national reach. One specializes in Whole Foods, the other's in Sprouts. We're in both those stores, along with natural grocers and a whole lot of other natural retailers across the country. And so we're generally found in like the co-ops and the spots you'd find, majority organic food.
And are you collecting milk from other farms, or is it all your family farm that the milk is coming from?
Yeah, we milk 5,000 cows of our own on 5 different farms. And last year in 2025, our sales exceeded our production. And so we are now selling all of our milk, and we've qualified a few partner farms, and we are now starting to incorporate some of their milk into our program.
Is there a difference between organic milk and regenerative milk?
Probably not a measurable difference. However, the real question should be, certified organic and certified regenerative, right? And so the part certified means that you're third party verified and certified. Or I'll start with organic. It's been around longer. Organic is a list of all these to-dos or things that you can't do. If you don't do this, you don't do this, you don't do that, fertilizer, chemicals, synthetic things, then you qualify for organic. Regenerative is kind of the opposite of that. It's a list of things you should do. Pay attention to your biology, always have living roots in the system, have natural ground disturbance occasionally, minimal tillage, things like that. And so I think regenerative really complements organic dairy, for instance. And I also believe that regenerative movement through what we're seeing now coming out of Washington, D.C., the MAHA movement, Make America Healthy Again, is kind of a new revolution that is bringing a lot of light to soil, or at least awareness to soil. Light is actually bad on soil, so we want awareness, and that's happening.
Yeah, so it's kind of fascinating to hear you talk about the 6% milk. I mean, you were like the trend has caught up with you, if you will.
Right.
Are there other areas where you see the consumer really going in your direction, if you want to call it that? I mean, the fat is definitely on trend. What else?
Yeah.
Where else is the regenerative movement catching hold?
Yeah, I love that question, because as I sit here today listening to different speakers and different topics, and I realize that, wow, we've been ahead of the curve in a lot of general areas. And it's not because we did any consumer studies or really paid attention. We just did. My wife Stephanie is the food police in our house, and she's really into nutrition, and we made products that make her happy. And she's a high fat gal that is thin, and her friends are confused by that. And so we've always known that fat is really good for you, and particularly when it's coming from grass-based products. And so I remember having super high cholesterol 35 years ago, and thinking, I took Lipitor for 15 years, and then I told somebody, you know what, I'm going to just stop this. It's terrible for my liver. It's just bad. I don't like it. I'm just going to live long enough until they decide that cholesterol is good for you. I literally said that to lots of people. and I think I've lived long enough now. It's awesome. So common sense. That's what we run on.
Well, Blake, I guess I'm curious, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges toward growth in the certified regenerative and certified organic markets?
Yeah, the biggest challenges really come from economics, and I've got a lot of large scale conventional dairy farming friends across the country, and they don't seriously look at organic production. Some do, but most don't, because you need a market to kind of complement that production, because the production costs you more, and you might you know have less yields and different things, and so it has to come with a market. Regenerative is different in that regenerative yields and margins. So basically, it doesn't matter what crop you're in, but you can be regenerative by using less inputs, cut your cost, and hopefully increase your yields by letting the biology, kind of waking up the biology and getting those livestock under your feet working for you. And when that happens, it snowballs in an extremely positive way. And so regenerative, if I'm talking to conventional farmers, they don't need a market to justify the move to regenerative. They will see yield improvements, or particularly margin improvements, profit in year 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And it will continue to grow.
Well, Blake, what a fascinating story and journey. We thank you so much for joining us here live on the Dairy Download.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Now let's get the banking perspective. We are excited to welcome Brad Nordholm. Brad is the CEO of Farmer Mac, the largest secondary market lender for rural America. With a career that spans over 4 decades, Brad is a seasoned executive with a wealth of experience in the financial services environment, including his involvement in agricultural and energy finance, capital markets, and credit. Brad, thank you for joining us on the live edition of the Dairy Download.
Very happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, Brad, to begin, can you please share with us your background and how you became involved in agricultural lending?
Well, first of all, I love American agriculture. I grew up in a little community in northern Minnesota, up in timber country. And like all good liberal arts graduates after college, I immediately wanted to go to Montana and be a cowboy. And
Of course.
that's what I did. But that led to my first stint in agriculture finance with the Farm Credit System. From there, I meandered into general finance. And then I spent 20 years in the electric power industry before being recruited to Farmer Mac as CEO in 2018. My wife and I live on a farm just outside of Washington, D.C., and I spend my free time working with Farm Bureau and with the local agricultural commission. And while I'm not a farmer who can support himself as a farmer, I enjoy every aspect of it.
So tell us a little bit about Farmer Mac and where it fits in the world of agricultural lending.
Farmer Mac requires some explanation because we are a secondary market, and you may wonder, what is a secondary market? We provide liquidity to other financial services companies that are lending to American agriculture and rural infrastructure. What that means practically is they make the loan, we buy it from them. And by doing that, we provide them capital back that they can use to re-lend. So it's a unique business model. Farmer Mac was actually created by Congress at the peak of the financial farm crisis in the mid-1980s with the mission to provide liquidity to rural America. I talk about it as liquidity that ultimately helps communities, farm families, and all those working around them to have more economic development opportunity.
And is there still a federal charter or involvement with Farmer Mac?
Indeed, we do, but it becomes even more unique because we have a one-of-a-kind congressional charter. We spend time on Capitol Hill explaining all the good work we're doing in rural America, but we are a for-profit company, full tax-paying company, New York Stock Exchange listed. So I'm spending a lot of time on Wall Street, also dealing with investors. Holding those two key stakeholders, Congress and for-profit investors, together is one of the challenges of the job, but it's also very, very rewarding.
And in terms of rural financing, it's not just farms and agriculture. You're talking about a bigger rural
Broadband, for example,
broadband,
maybe. Yeah.
energy.
Absolutely. So our largest piece of business is purchasing first mortgage loans to farmers, ranchers, dairy farmers. Um, and those are originated by about 700 financial institutions around the country. We've worked to make that really fast and easy with a new technology product called Ag Power. Over the last 6 years, we've moved almost 80% of our loans to that platform. So instead of taking days, we can do it in hours. We also do business with agribusinesses, dairy companies. The changes that we have kind of pushed over the last few years with that is to build out our teams with dairy industry and corporate agribusiness experts. But then to your point, we have over the last 6 years expanded into critical rural infrastructure. That's very mission centric. How is it that we support the communities in which farmers are doing that work, especially when everything is becoming so data driven? Broadband, for example, data centers, for example, electric power, for example, electric power distribution. These are all areas where we have built expertise and do a lot of business now.
And in terms of, so you're not the direct lender to most of these folks. You're the indirect. You're the secondary lender.
Yeah.
But when you look at the dairy industry today and beef income and things like that,
Yeah.
how granular and involved you get in those conversations around the profile of a dairy farm client today. So how are your clients taking advantage of those opportunities, and how do you interact in that realm?
It's true that the other financial institution is going to have that direct relationship with that dairy farmer that you were providing as an example, but we know their business. We underwrite every single loan that we buy. So we're going through pro formas. We're using artificial intelligence and computer-aided decision to understand it. And we have on-staff experts to really dig in and make sure that we're making sound credit decisions. And our 40-year track record says we make very good decisions.
What qualities do you see repeated over and over again in terms of your successful farms?
Boy, that's a great question. I oftentimes say that every farm is different. Every farm has different notions about sustainability that depend on their unique crop, their herd, their land use, the environment in which they operate. But there are some similarities. What we're seeing now is that the new generation, it is very focused on making very good data-driven decisions. They want to capture the data about the crop, about the cows, about every aspect of production, and use that to make better decisions. Without a question, that's where there's a lot of innovation and also, I would say, discipline going on in American agriculture today.
Talk a little bit about risk and opportunity. So let's talk about risk first. As you look at the ag economic landscape and farming in America, what do you see as some of the bigger challenges and risks out there?
We do business with farmers, producers with 130 different crops, and almost everyone is a different story today. If you're talking about corn or soybeans or rice, there's some very sad stories out there. Cost of production almost across the board is above what can be earned, the gross revenue from a year's crop. And so, we'd like to think that this is a typical agricultural cycle, but we're concerned about the export situation and global demand for those primary row crops in the United States. On the other hand, meat proteins are doing great. Dairy is doing well. Many specialty crops, certainly vegetables, almonds have had a 50% rebound in pricing over the last 12 months. So many other crops are doing well. So each story is a bit different. In general, though, I think the supply-demand equation for major American crops and the impact of uncertainty about tariffs and trade agreements is one of the things that is probably we're keeping our closest eye on right now.
And let's talk about the other side of the coin. I know within the portfolio, things are doing better, things are not so doing as well.
Yeah.
But overall, where do you see major opportunities for U.S. agriculture in the years ahead?
Well, the convergence of agriculture and fiber with energy is a big area of opportunity looking ahead. It can be used defensively, for example, to use manure to and capture methane, to create biogas, to sell renewable biogas on pipeline, or convert it through a cogeneration system and electricity to use back in that farm or in that production facility. That is making a more sustainable, efficient, and low cost operation. So that's just one small example of many to reduce costs in production agriculture. The other opportunities are undoubtedly something we're seeing here at this Dairy Forum, and that is a focus on reaching out globally and working around trade tariff agreements or tariff uncertainty to forge new trading relationships with countries and companies and consumer groups around the world. Without question, a big opportunity.
From a lending perspective, h- how how does all of that uncertainty influence decisions from the banking world?
First of all, we believe that when it comes to corporate customers and producers who are largely still family operations, although getting very large and sophisticated, that they're in the position, given their decades of experience, to discern these risks and use the tools available to them to address the risks in the best possible fashion. So, for example, we're seeing much more utilization of marketing and price risk management plans, for example, to lock in margin prior to the growing season rather than waiting to the end of the growing season. We're seeing opportunities to do the same with interest rates that have moved just in the last months after it had gone on the way of going from variable rate to fixed rate loan products as a way of locking in that interest component of the cost structure of an operation. Um, Farmers are sophisticated and getting more sophisticated every day, and they're using these various risk management tools, thinking critically about their operations, wringing costs out. We look at that and judge their ability and their, in some cases, decades long track record in doing that very well.
Going back to Washington and the charter, the congressional backed charter, how do you feel about the rural urban divide, if you will? And is your voice in Washington, or is the voice of the farmer in Washington, how do you feel about that? And where are we in terms of that arc of progress, if you will?
Um, well, I think you could state that from a political standpoint, we are not seeing as much progress as we'd like to see. At Farmer Mac, we work very, very hard to make sure that our practices are here to address all farmers, agribusiness, and others who are operating within existing law. We are not legislating new practices at Farmer Mac. We are responding to those who are doing that very, very well in the marketplace. I spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill, and we're eager to tell the story of Farmer Mac, of the success of American agriculture. And we find that that is something that is well heard actually on both sides of the aisle. American agriculture, generally speaking, more so than almost any industry, enjoys broad bipartisan support. It gets a little complicated with the focus on food assistance that's in the Farm Bill, and I'm not diminishing the need for that, but being in the Farm Bill complicates that a bit. And so we have to make the clear distinctions when speaking to both sides of the aisle, but we do that. And it's something that all of American agriculture needs to continue to be very committed to do. I would just note that there's so many people on Capitol Hill who have never lived in rural settings, who have never met farmers. They're the ones who need education and engagement.
Food doesn't come from the grocery store.
Absolutely.
How's your dairy forum been so far?
My dairy farm has been great. I will sheepishly admit this is the first time I've been here in
Well,
the 8
welcome.
years that I've been at Farmer Mac. We've had other members of the team here, but when I received an invitation to speak, I was very excited to be here. What struck me coming in here is that very positive energy. The innovation going on is so apparent. You only need to be here for mere minutes to sense that. And the positive outlook and opportunities that the dairy industry has. I mean, innovation, from growing global markets, for improving cost structure, from riding the wave of increased emphasis on proteins right now and consumer choice. Some of the success that the dairy industry's had in Washington around whole milk is an example. These are all really positive things that I think bode very well for the dairy industry. And I've just enjoyed my time learning more about that from many different people. I've enjoyed that so much.
Well, Brad, we really appreciate you joining us on this live edition of the Dairy Download.
I've enjoyed being with you. Thanks very much.
That's a wrap for today's show. As always, we want to thank our production team, Mariah Minnick, Andrew Jerome, and Jeff Cullen at IDFA, and Abby Bauer over here at EverAg. If you are interested in what Kathleen and I do for our day jobs, check us out at ever.ag. Remember, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform.
Thanks for listening to the Dairy Download. Until next time, stay sharp.